lovers. I am so blessed and honored to be in a position to share, tools and tips and tricks that have the potential to heal and to bring you to a place of full sexual embodiment. And one of the tools that I absolutely love and have been using for the better part of a decade are crystal yoni products, including pleasure wands and yoni eggs. And I was so excited to recently come across a brand called Wands, Wands. I met the founder here in Austin and I absolutely loved who she was. I love getting to know the people behind the products that I like to use. And I just loved her mission to really support women and men to explore, celebrate, and honor their sexuality. I felt this transmission of slow, sensual seduction in all of who she was and all that she brought to the world. So I went ahead and gave it a try. I purchased a blue quartz Emerita wand, and the Emerita wand is great because it has this like cool bulby end on it, which is designed for G-spot and cervical stimulation, but can also be used for prostate stimulation. So it's great for men and women and can even be used between partners. So I'm so honored to have built this relationship with her and to be able to offer you guys an amazing discount code. So if you use the code Leola, Leola, that will give you 15% off all products. And the website is wands.com, Wands.com. And we'll go ahead and link that in the show notes as well for you. So thank you so much for listening. And also you're welcome for the inevitable pleasure and healing and ecstasy that is coming your way with these products. Let's dive into the episode. Welcome to Talk Tantra to Me. It is such an honor to be holding space for this divine knowledge to make its way into your ears and lifestyle. Today, I talk Tantra with Natalie. She is also a podcast host of the Feminine Frequency podcast, and author of The Feminine Way. I am so grateful for her content and so appreciative that she is here on the podcast to offer her perspective of living an expansive life. So thank you for being here, Amy. Why don't you start by telling us what is the feminine way? What does that mean?
The feminine way is about living a life that makes you feel alive, turned on, that makes you feel vital, and really is a path of living life from your heart and from your intuition. So a lot of people might think, okay, the feminine way means like, oh, I need to be in my feminine all of the time. And as we'll talk about today, really the feminine way is about recovering from thousands of years of being in masculine overdrive. And it's more about how can we incorporate more feminine principles, more of these really energetics that allow us to feel healthy, to feel pleasure, to feel joy. How can we bring more of those in and come back into harmony within ourselves, within our relationships, and within the collective?
Yeah, I love it. Super enrolled. I'm curious to hear more about like your journey with discovering the feminine way. How did you get into this juicy way of being and then ultimately become a leader and a leader of this movement?
Yeah, I think I discovered about the feminine and how to incorporate more feminine energy because I was feeling super depleted and disconnected from myself, disconnected from my joy. I was chronically depressed. I was on multiple different medications, had a lot of chronic health issues, autoimmune symptoms, and I was in a relationship and a marriage that on paper looked really great, but I wasn't feeling fulfilled and satisfied. And that was similarly in all aspects of my life. It was like this, okay, I checked all the boxes. I did all the things that I thought I was supposed to do, but internally I was every single day waking up with anxiety and being like, there has to be more to life than this. And so after asking that question many times, like, why am I so unhappy? And like, there has to be a different way. That's really what catapulted me into my own self-exploration and personal development and my own spiritual awakening. And from that, I ended up leaving my marriage, which was a huge shift and really the catalyst into becoming who I am today. And I really feel like I needed to learn those lessons. I call it like your soul curriculum, where these things that I was experiencing really led me to be able to then share from an embodied way, teach from an embodied way, rather than just like learning about this stuff in books. It's like, oh no, actually, I know what it's like to go through a full-blown ego death. And I know what it's like to be really disconnected from my body and my pleasure. And here's how I overcame that and went through that. And that feels like the most impactful way that I can serve and that I can support other women on their journeys.
Yeah, I love this perspective on mental health, and it's something that I'd like to go deeper in. I deeply resonate with that. I had the exact same feeling where I'd wake up and be like, I just am waking up depressed. What else is there? Like, what do I do about this? And for me, it was really taking on the tantric lifestyle, which is inclusive of masculine and feminine, is really about, finding the balance between them and finding inner sacred union with our masculine and feminine, along with a lot else. But I find that it's oftentimes like the qualities of the masculine, the productivity, the consistency, all those pieces are very applauded. And then so that I kind of had down and almost had down in a toxic way. And then it was bringing in the feminine was and really amplifying her was really, really supportive. But I'd love to talk more about the mental health piece. How do you approach mental health, depression, anxiety, all those things from this feminine way, this feminine perspective?
This is honestly the biggest reason why I do the work that I do. And we have an epidemic of so many people living their lives, going through autopilot and just not experiencing life in a way that fuels them and that they feel energized and inspired by. And I know what it was like, similar to you, to wake up every day and being like, why am I so unhappy? And
Yeah.
I do believe that in some cases there is a physiological chemical imbalance. I mean, I was told at a young age that I had a chemical imbalance and that's why I was depressed and that I would feel that way forever and that I would have to be on medication forever. And so that was the narrative that I was told. And what I see on a deeper level for most people, and at this point, I've worked with, hundreds of women who struggle with anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder. Like it's real. Like this stuff is so common. And what I've found is that often there is a deeper inner battle between the soul and the ego. And it's like we create this life that, like you said, is praised on the outside. And we have, whether it's the fancy job or it's the relationship or it's the money that we're constantly striving for, but it's not always aligned with what our soul came here for and what our soul came here to express. And so there's a disconnect. There's a very big gap oftentimes because we keep following that path of what society wants from us and we get further and further and further away from who we truly are. And that's where that anxiety and depression comes in, because our emotions are actually here to teach us something. They're speaking to us. They're always giving us messages. And so if you're feeling anxious or depressed, it's not usually just for no reason. Like there's usually something that's out of alignment, and your anxiety and depression are asking you to listen. They're asking you to pay attention and to tune in to, like what's missing here. And that's a discovery, like that's a journey to figure that out.
Yeah. And it's a journey of attunement too. But what a way to see anxiety, depression, all mental health issues as a gift, as an invitation to realign. And I will even say I've had anxiety and depression since I was like a teen and at varying degrees through my life. And it's not something that like I never experience anymore, although it's far less frequent. But anytime I do feel something activating within me that looks like one of those things, it now, instead of like being in fear or frustration that, oh my God, I'm here again, it's instead like, what isn't in a tune? Like, what do I get to shift? And that's just so powerful. And we see so many people too that, we're told like, here, just take this pill and then your anxiety will go away.
or your depression will go away. Oftentimes what they're doing is just numbing you the fuck out. Um, and and then oftentimes as well, like it's not enough at a certain point, and then that feeling of dis-ease continues to come up and come up and come up until we deal with it. And I think that the feminine way is a really great way to deal with it, personally.
Yeah. And I want to speak to that a little bit more because I'll share from my journey. Like, I'm so freaking grateful that I had access to antidepressants because at that point in my journey, I didn't have the tools that I have now. And I was really struggling. And so I just want to put a disclaimer that if that's part of your toolkit and that's part of your journey, like, no shame to that. Like, that's okay. And it's not the long-term solution and it's not necessarily getting to the root. So in addition to having that support, if that's what you're choosing and that's what's right for you, knowing that that's not a long-term solution and using these principles of the feminine way, which are about connecting more deeply with your soul, connecting more deeply with your body, connecting more deeply with your emotions and intuition, as you keep aligning with that and bringing more of that into your life, you will start to see a decrease in the negative self-talk, in the overthinking, overanalyzing. Like, that will start to shift. And one of the chapters in the book is about emotional alchemy, which is like taking these darker emotions, and instead of, our society teaches us like, your emotions are bad, they're wrong, they're embarrassing, like you need to get your stuff together, you're too sensitive, what's wrong with you? Like, we all have emotions for a reason. And it's learning how to understand those emotions. And when they come up, how do we meet those emotions with love, with compassion? And then how do we transmute them into, power? How do we transmute them into joy? How do we transmute them into freedom and liberation? Like, that is 100% possible. And we don't have to be like identified with our depression or identified with our anxiety as like, that's who we are.
Yeah, I think it's very common. First of all, I want to say thank you for saying that disclaimer. That's so, so true. And I'm sure that's very illuminating and also validating for many people. And I totally agree. I've been in a similar situation as well. So thanks for putting that out there. And we often make our feelings our identity. Like, it's like, I am sad, I am this. And in other cultures, like in French, instead of saying I am sad, they say I have sadness. And so it's like allowing yourself to step away from the feeling and just have it be something that's moving through you, that's circulating, and releasing it and creating space for something more expansive. Once you've fully felt it, you do have to feel it to heal it as well. So I'm curious, we're speaking a lot about like the feminine way as this concept, but I'm curious how it actually looks in your life. Like, what is the life of a being that is living the feminine way? What does your like typical day look like?
Yeah, I'll start by what it feels like, because I think that's ultimately like what people desire. And when we're not living in alignment with the feminine way, we often feel overwhelmed, stressed out, burnt out, tired. We're constantly in our head. It's hard to relax. It's hard to enjoy things. And we feel really disconnected. And so, on the contrary, living in the feminine way is a lot more about ease and flow and magnetism. And it's not that there are never challenges, but it's when those challenges come up, how do we meet those challenges and how do we ride kind of like the waves as they come through? So for me, like I mentioned before, how the feminine way isn't just about being in your feminine all of the time. And similar to you, I have a very developed masculine, like, I run a business, I've got a lot of structure, I've got goals. I'm a Gemini, I'm very analytical. I've got a lot going on in my head all the time. So it's like these things are still there, but I use those skills to help me to integrate more of my feminine. So what I mean by that is that we can use the masculine to create structure, and structure creates freedom. And for some people, they have a hard time tapping into structure and feel frustrated with that. And they're like, oh, it feels so limiting. But for me, what that looks like is setting up my day and my week in a way that allows me to both be productive, but also to take space to do things that I enjoy, to have fun, to dance, to connect with nature, to connect with my partner, like really making sure that I have the space for that. And that looks like, certain days, Mondays and Fridays, I don't schedule meetings. And I know not everyone has their own business, but there are ways that you can work with your schedule. But Mondays and Fridays, like that's more for creativity, for podcasting, for it's a different flow and a different energy. I also, like I said, I infuse dance and movement into my morning practices, my morning rituals. And in the book, The Feminine Way, I talk a lot about starting your day with devotion, with your daily devotion practices, whether that's meditation, gratitude journaling, whether it's a pleasure practice, getting out in nature, whatever it is, to really tap into that feminine frequency and energy before you start your day, so you can infuse that as you move throughout your day.
Yeah, I love that. I think that when people hear about structure, it's like, oh, it's like fitting more things in and making it all like fit together. And for me, the structure is like setting boundaries as well. So like I have a similar boundary with time and like when I'm working and when I'm not, but I don't schedule like any meetings before noon. Like that's my time. And like I have any time every morning before noon, like those few hours are for devotion, but the devotion looks different every day. And some days it's being more devotional to my body and moving my body. Sometimes it's like actually staying in bed and making love. And it's just like having the structure of like, I'm starting at noon and that's when my work day starts, and having the morning to be in flow and to surrender to what is inspired to come through in a day just feels really, really supportive for my feminine system. But it wasn't always like that. Like I used to wake up to an alarm every single day. And it definitely took, over years of time adjusting my life and like my work to be supportive of this. And I think that that's the thing that is important to recognize too, is that it doesn't necessarily all need to happen overnight, but the feminine way could be the North Star for your future as well.
Yeah. And I think we all crave that, at least as feminine beings, but I think we really crave that spaciousness and that freedom to create the lifestyle that we want. And that is, in my experience, 100% possible. And it's also the new paradigm, like the old paradigm of working from 9 to 5 and from just being at your desk all day and doing work that you don't love. And like just being in that robotic, like following the societal norms and formula, like that's old paradigm. Like we're shifting out of that and we're seeing that. And so many people are waking up being like, wait, am I just going to work until I retire and then I'm going to enjoy my life? Like, no, F that. Like not happening.
Yeah. There's that meme that's like, what, like, did you come here to just like go to work, go to bed, like, and clean your house and die? Like, is that what this is? Yeah, no, clearly not. I love that. And so we're talking about all these amazing things and we're really speaking into the feminine, but I'd love to just ask you, and I feel like I know the answer and maybe we all do, but is the feminine way just for women or is it for men too? And if so, how can men lean into this way of being too?
Yeah. The book itself is written for women because that's the realm of my work. That's what I specialize in, is women's empowerment and embodiment coaching. However, the principles of the feminine way are, in my belief, is really the direction that we're heading in consciousness, like as a whole, like in the world. And so that applies to both men and women. And we see, I think men are also confused where they've maybe been in this toxic masculine paradigm, and the patriarchy impacts men just as much as it impacts women. I mean, there doesn't need to be a comparison one or the other, but it does impact men a lot. And things like men feeling disconnected from their emotions and feeling, unfulfilled in their work, it's the same thing. It just looks different. So yeah, these principles I feel are universal principles that apply for both men and women.
Yeah, I totally agree. And, so we're ushering in this feminine way. In your words, like, how do you feel we've been operating? Like, how would you describe how we got here, I suppose?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. When I was writing the book, I was doing a lot of research on this because I think it's important to understand, like, how did we get here in the first place? And if we look at it from even like an astrological perspective, we are coming out of what is like the Piscean age. And the Piscean age has a lot of qualities around like money and power and status, and is very hierarchical in nature. And we every about 2000 to 2160 years, we have a major shift astrologically. And so we've already entered the age of Aquarius. And the age of Aquarius is more about collaboration. It's about community. It's about sharing your unique gifts. It's a very different way of being. And so we're kind of getting out of this hyper independent way of living where we've become really disconnected from the earth. We've become disconnected from community, from our bodies, from our intuition, and we're shifting into this new way of being. And it's really nuanced. It is patriarchy, but there's so much religious programming that is, embedded in this, where we have shame around our sexuality, and we have shame around our bodies and our emotions. And I think that we're starting to really break free from that, but the programming is so deep because it's been around for so long, and it's not just in our generation. Like, this is multi-generational. And if we look back, even if I look at like my maternal line, like the patterns that come with this patriarchal programming, which essentially for women ends up kind of guiding us towards being in the good girl archetype, where we're people pleasers, we're martyrs, we're perfectionists. We just like are operating in these ways that are not authentic and true to who we are. And so that's where we're coming from, and where we're going. And what I believe is that we're multidimensional beings, and we're meant to be embodied in both our masculine and feminine. And we're meant to express all parts of ourselves, not just these parts that are quote unquote acceptable by society.
They say you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And this is something that I really, really resonate with. And as I've invested in living a tantric lifestyle, my relationships have evolved and become so much more juicy and liberating. And I believe that this is something that everyone deserves. However, finding these people can be a little bit challenging at first. And so it is my mission to create more spaces for people to find individuals that are resonant with the tantric lifestyle, that are really resonant with you, the listener, the person who is investing their time into living a life that is expansive and liberating. So with that, I'm committed to creating more and more safe spaces for people to discover their desires and practice their boundaries, to connect in community, to celebrate and to grow together, so that we can all step into a more authentic version of ourselves and experience truly unconditional love. So we have Tantra retreats for men, women, couples, singles. We also have female-only retreats just for the ladies stepping into their divine feminine. We have play parties. We have Tantra workshops, Tantra yoga, women's circles. We've got all kinds of really powerful in-person events. You can find all the details at www.talktantratome.com/events. You can also just go to talktantratome.com and click the events tab to find out about all the latest and the greatest. And if you're wanting me all to yourself, I can't blame you. I also host private retreats for both individuals and couples. Those are one-on-one. You get me all to yourself. And I'm available for private Tantra workshops and performances. And this is great for events like your birthday, or maybe a bachelorette party or a bachelor weekend. We can talk and create something that will be extra special just for you. So I cannot wait to connect with you in real life. But for now, thanks so much for your patience with this brief interruption, and let's get back to the episode.
I'm curious to hear more about if like the book or your work in general addresses integrating the dark feminine as well, and like what that means for this work and for women in the world?
Hmm. Yeah, I actually hosted an in-person dark feminine immersion. I think it was last year in person, and it was phenomenal. It was like this really deep, rich container where it was a space for women to explore parts of themselves that have been shamed by society, but that have also been rejected by themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like we need more spaces like that, which I know you're creating and I'm creating, and I feel like it's really needed. But in the book, I talk about different feminine archetypes, and I would say like the one archetype, there's two archetypes that really stand out for this. One is the seductress archetype, and the other is the wild woman.
Yeah.
And I feel like these are the archetypes that kind of disrupt how quote unquote women are supposed to behave. And it allows for more of like that messiness and that kind of quote unquote darkness of things that have been suppressed or been rejected for so long to come to the surface and to come online. So I feel like it's really deeply embedded in those archetypes.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that we've really distorted what the dark feminine is. Like, there is a version of the dark feminine that is shadowy and that is out of integrity, but there's just as much wholeness in the dark feminine as well. Just like in the light feminine, there's shadow and distortion. You know, you spoke into the martyr and the people pleaser and those pieces, which in my opinion are shadows of the light feminine. But the dark feminine, like, you know, the seductress that's like using her power to manipulate people is completely different than the seductress that's like fully embodied and is like a type of muse to the world. And the same with the wild woman. And I would also include like the wise woman or the oracle in the dark feminine too. Like, you know, we've made out witches to be
The
so,
mystic, yeah.
yeah, so bad and wrong and like nefarious, when in reality, like the real witches, most of them were like herbalists and like, you know, midwives, not really, you know, these like evil beings at all. And there's just so much magic in the dark. There's so much magic. So thank you for speaking
Mhm.
into that as well. I want to also go into, okay, so we're moving into this feminine way. It almost feels like this like utopian view of the world. And I'm just like, what is your dream for the world in the feminine way? Like, what do you vision for the world?
Yeah, this is so good. And for some people, I think for most of the collective, like this sounds really radical and absurd, but this new paradigm has been talked about for thousands of years in different
Mm-hmm.
spiritual communities. And it is coming to fruition for many people. It's no longer just this like future vision. It's like many people, including myself, are living it. And again, that
Yeah.
doesn't mean that everything's perfect all of the time. It's like, but we've broken free from these old paradigms. So my vision is for, and I'll speak for my vision for women, since that's really what I feel like my soul came here to do. And is support women to being their most authentic self and living in their truth, really making decisions from their heart instead of their minds, like using their heart as a guide when they are navigating through relationships, when they're navigating through career decisions, like really leading from the heart. And in that, like doing things in a way where you're not just like isolated, but where you're supported by community, where you are uplifted by community, where you're celebrated by community, and where everyone brings their own unique gifts and their own unique magic, right? Like we all have something unique to offer, and bringing that together in community and sisterhood, but also with with soul brothers and soul family, like doing that together in community. And of course, because we're here on, talking about pleasure too, is creating a life that you actually enjoy and that feels good instead of a life that just looks good from the outside. Like
Mm.
ultimately, that's what I feel happens when we're living in our truth, when we're listening to our hearts. It's like it's a life that feels good. And that's what I wish for all humans, really.
Yeah. I mean, just imagining all humans feeling empowered to decide and to move from their heart, the whole world gets to change into that. It's just so beautiful. Like in times like this where there's a lot of conflict happening in the world, it's it's a relief to feel the potential of that shifting. And it starts with us. It starts with us individually committing to that. So just an invitation to the listener, if you're like, what the fuck about the world, the best thing that you can do is just drop into your heart and start to use some of these practices. So buy Amy's book. um yeah, that was super beautiful. So thank you for speaking into that too. And
Yeah.
go ahead.
I also just want to like something that's coming through right now is speaking into like the privilege that it is to do this work. Like it is such a privilege to be in a time where the feminine is rising and where we have access to this type of content and information. And it is a privilege to be living in, I mean, I'm in the United States, it's a privilege to be living in this country. And it's a privilege, you know, to be a white woman as well. And that there are some aspects of this work that, you know, many people don't have access to. So I really want to acknowledge that and also share that I've seen women from all different backgrounds and all different financial, you know, economical statuses using these practices and these tools to become empowered, and that it doesn't have to be this like disempowering or a block to feeling like it's not possible for you too. Like it is possible. And I also find that some of the most basic tools are the most powerful ones. Like I think sometimes we think we have to spend a ton of money and we have to like, yeah, do all these things, but some of the most basic tools are the most powerful ones. So really devoting to your practices. And like, that's why I wrote this book, because I want more people to have access to this wisdom.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful, beautiful point that it's safe to do this work now. It wasn't safe for a lot of women even 100 years ago, even 50 years ago, and still in many parts of the world today it's not safe to be doing this work, or at least be forward facing with it. And let's not take that for granted, and let's not, you know, revert into another world where it is less safe. I mean, there were witch burnings and trials and all sorts of things for women being in their embodied nature. So what a beautiful time to be alive and to almost see it as like a duty to, as a woman, to share these very innate natural gifts, and also for men to tap into their own inner feminine and also support the women in their lives through this work.
Yeah, I want to speak to that more because you asked like, how does this apply to men? And I think it applies to, you know, us as individuals, but then also how does it apply to relationships, and how can men show up as a king, as their most divine masculine self? Is like, I talk about this with my partner a lot, where it's like, if men haven't learned how to tap into their feminine and they don't know what it's like to feel their emotions, there's no way that they can fully hold space for the feminine. Like it's not possible. And so this work is so important for us, again, as individuals, and then also to cultivate like the deepest intimacy that exists.
Yeah. Beautifully said. I feel like this is such a good, like there are a few more things that I want to get into, but I'm like, oh, like what a good, like we've really hit a peak here. I love it. So you are writing this book, you're managing to do all of this, all of this work, bringing all this magic to the world and staying in your feminine. And that's challenging to run a business and to be, you know, a boss babe. And there's definitely this culture of like hustling and doing more and creating more, and like so much pressure to identify ourselves with what we're like putting into the world. And I'm just curious how you've managed that in yourself.
Yeah. I mean, there's still times where I find myself in my masculine, especially in my business. And it's not a problem to be in your masculine, but where I'm like, oh, whoa, like that was too much for me. Right. And that's why I wrote this book. And that's why I'm teaching this work, because it is my own personal practice too, that I get to keep learning. What I will say, one of the things that I think is so important is being open to receive support. And I think that's something that we forget about, is that we feel like we have to do everything on our own. And I think another thing that's really beautiful about the new paradigm is collaboration. Like, here you and I are having this conversation, sharing this wisdom, getting, to connect with each other's audiences. Like, how beautiful is that we can leverage and we can work together to get our messages out to more people. So yeah, there's definitely times where I find myself more in my masculine, and I catch it a lot sooner than I used to. And I can feel it in my body, where I feel tense, or I feel like my jaw and my shoulders are tense, or I feel just really depleted at the end of the day or the end of the week. And when I notice that, it's like, okay, how can I reset? How can I come back into my own alignment? And oftentimes that's, okay, let me get out into nature. Like, I moved here to Asheville, North Carolina 2 years ago. And one of my biggest things is like, I want to be connected to nature. Like, that helps me to feel connected to my feminine. Or how can I make sure that I'm, incorporating dancing throughout my day, throughout my week? What are some ways that I can really prioritize that? And it is a constant, like, checking in and figuring out, in this season of my life and my business, what needs to happen to support me to feel in alignment.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you spoke into like us collaborating and sharing, and it brought to mind, we do similar work in a way, and instead of being like threatened, it's like, how can we use like our different perspectives of this to enlighten more and to expand more and to lift each other up. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on the sisterhood wound, or if you talk about that in the book or in other parts of your work.
Oh my goodness, what a freaking journey with the sisterhood wound. I was like, when I was younger, I definitely hung out with boys more. I felt like it was easier, I would say. I really had a hard time with my relationship with women. And a lot of that was a hard time, my relationship with myself, and just a lot of comparison and self-judgment. And I think that our culture also has a lot of embedded narratives, gossip and judgment. And just like, we are in the old paradigm is a lot of competition. And like you said, like, oh, we're in the same we're in the same field, or have in the same industry. And like, that means that we need to compete with each other rather than support each other or collaborate with each other. So I think there's a lot of narratives around that. And I think as we keep healing our relationship with ourselves, we work on our childhood wounds. I think that for me, the biggest turning point was as I embodied more of my authentic self and open to be more vulnerable and to let other women in, and to not pretend that I had it all put together and that I like was, happy all of the time, or that everything was going perfectly. Like, when I really let other women see me, that's when I started to cultivate these deeper, more authentic connections. And what you just shared about, the competition, the new paradigm is like, I believe in abundance. I believe that there are enough people out there who are awakening, and women who are seeking this knowledge and wisdom. And the women who are going to resonate with my message and my voice and my journey are going to be different to women who resonate with yours, or they might work with both of us at some point. And like,
Yeah.
that's really cool too. So, yeah, it's been such a journey. And I know the sisterhood wound is such a big one for most women. And it's so beautiful when you can get to the other side of that. And there's still moments where I have those little pings of like, oh, I felt rejected, or I feel left out. And that's work that I get to keep looking at. But not having that be such a struggle it's such a gift to have beautiful relationships with other women.
I love that. I'd love to hear a little bit more as well about your book and some of the things that, like, other topics that you address in there, just to kind of give people a better idea of the scope.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. This book was also, I probably have said the word journey like 200 times in this episode, but that's how I kind of see everything. I mean, this was a 2-year process of really, yeah, it's such a vulnerable process to share. The way that the book is laid out is that there's a lot of personal stories and there's teaching. So it's like, it's considered a teaching memoir is the genre of it. And so I feel like when I was on my own, like kind of more beginning stages of my personal development journey, it was really helpful for me to hear other women's stories and to see what they've been through and to see where they are now, and really finding hope and inspiration in that. So throughout the book, I share a lot of my own stories, things around like my inner journey of getting to the place where I finally had the courage to leave my marriage at the age of 27, like the inner battle that happened for me to finally listen to my intuition and take that leap of faith. I talk about shame that I've experienced in around pleasure and coming from a more religious background and really reclaiming my pleasure. And I talk about my journey with getting burnt out in my business and really realigning with leading from the feminine way in my business as well. So those are some of the personal stories. And then I share lots of client stories and really practical tools and tips, because I think when it comes to these concepts of masculine and feminine energetics, people understand what they are, at least many people do now, but they're like, how do I do this? And it's funny because being in your feminine is less about doing and having a calculated pathway of exactly how to get there, but having practices and tools and principles is also really helpful. So throughout the book, there's guided practices. I've recorded a bunch of meditations too that go along with the book, and embodiment practices. So yeah, it's really a labor of love. And I'm so honored and grateful that I get to share this with your community and with the world at large.
That's beautiful. And is it out already, or when is it releasing?
Yeah, so the official launch date is November 11th. So of course, 11/11. I was actually on track to publish it next year in February, and I just there's something about the timing of this book and feeling like this information is needed now, and that it's like meant to be shared now. And so I pushed up the timeline to November, and it just lined up that 11/11 is when it's going to be released in the world. So if you are listening to this before then, pre-orders are available on my website. You can go to amynatalieco.com and you'll see the tab there that says book, so you can order it there. But yeah, after November 11th, you can get it on Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, all the online places to purchase books.
Perfect. Wow. Yeah, I'm in my publishing journey as well, and it is a journey, as you said, and the timeline shifts, and it's a lot. So good for you for following it through, and I'm so excited to see like the beauty and magic that it brings to the world. So incredible.
Thank you. I'm excited to learn more about your book and to read it one day.
For sure. And where else can people find you, support you? Anything else that you want to speak into?
Yeah, I think the best place where you can find everything that you need to know is on my Instagram, which you can find me at Amy Natalie Co. And in the link in my bio, you'll find the link to my podcast, which is the Feminine Frequency Podcast. You'll find a resource for a free guided morning practice. So if you want to connect to your body and your confidence, that's a great practice. And then you'll also find the link for the book and info about my coaching too. Yeah.
Sweet. Amazing. Well, thank you again, Amy, for joining me today. And I also want to express my gratitude to the listener. Thank you once again for opening yourself up to the idea of the feminine way. And with so much gratitude and love, have a sexy and spiritual day. And we'll catch you next week on Talk Tantra to Me. Ta-ta.